I'm Bob Kamei, Vice Dean of Education at Duke-NUS Graduate Medical School and co-director of the Academic Medicine Education Institute. We're really delighted to have with us today Dr. Bradley Sharpe, who is Professor of Medicine at UC San Francisco, and he's brought here as part of the Resident as Future Teachers program of CRAFT, a SingHealth Residency. And he's here to share his expertise in medical education, specifically helping our residents become better teachers. So, Brad, thanks for being here with us today. My first question for you is that you've heard that we're really placing a lot of emphasis on teaching skills of our residents. We've, different groups, and myself included, when I was at UCSF, worked with residents as teachers. What's sort of the latest thoughts about residents as clinical teachers?
Well, Bob, first, thank you for having me. It's great to be here and share some of my experience. You know, I think over time we've realized that we have may have the smartest residents. They're very hardworking, but just because someone is smart and understands the content and takes good care of patients doesn't mean they're an effective teacher, and that they need teaching skills like they need clinical skills. Interpreting an EKG, performing an appendectomy, why would teaching be any different? So some of it is a change in how we view them as teachers. And for me, quite simply, it's a math problem, which is if you look at the amount of time a medical student or an intern, for example, spends with an attending physician or a supervising physician versus their resident they're working closely with, it's not even close. They're spending the majority of their time with that senior resident. So part of it is just a math game of who are they spending most of their time with.
And it seems like it should be a natural thing that people should just be able to automatically do that, but that's not necessarily true.
No, I think it is. There has been this long assumption that, well, if you're in the clinical environment, you learn from this smart person that's working really hard. Once you learn more about teaching and education, that there is a specific skill set. Again, that's not different than any of the other skills. It's not different than the other competencies that we expect trainees to have, and that if we can give the teachers, the residents as teachers, those skills, that may pay off in multiple ways. And I sometimes describe it as a geometric fashion in terms of the ability to impact practice. For example, if a senior resident teaches an intern something, how to examine the abdomen in a particular way, and then that intern then goes on and teaches every student they work with for a year, you've now multiplied by 10 a single teaching moment. But that teaching moment might happen, but it may not stick if we haven't given that senior resident the skills they need to do it effectively. How do I teach effectively in the clinical setting? So I think much of it is taking advantage of opportunities that happen day in and day out. I'll add one other thing. I'm a believer that for many physicians, who they are as a physician, who they end up being as a physician, much of that, I don't know what percentage, is from medical school and their residency. And there are these powerful moments, these small powerful moments that happen, problem listing with a senior resident, doing a procedure for the first time with a resident, having your supervising resident ask you, what do you want to do next? Those small moments make people the physician they are. So why shouldn't we give the senior person, the resident in that moment, the skills to do it even better than they might be doing it already?
Did you have one of those small moments in education? Is that what got you excited about what you're doing here?
That's a good question. I sometimes share that my moment in education in terms of why I got interested, especially in teaching to teach, was actually from failures on my part. Was actually from having, when I transitioned in our model, when you become a second-year resident in internal medicine, suddenly you're leading a team and are expected to teach, and I had these very powerful moments in the first month of I understood the clinical content to the degree I should. I could manage that, but how to actually teach effectively and manage the team? I just had days where people were crying. We'd lose a medical student, didn't know where they went, and there were, again, a series of things where I said there must be a better way. If there's an evidence base for management of acute coronary syndrome, there must be an evidence base for teaching, and it turns out there is, and so got very interested.
So it sounds like we both are evidence that you can actually learn how to teach, that it's a teachable skill.
I am a firm believer that it is a very teachable skill, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. So as we think about residents as teachers, is there something different about a resident as teacher versus a faculty member who's a teacher, or someone who's been more experienced in teaching? or are they the same?
I think, well, it's a great question, Bob. I think some things are very similar, which is the opportunity to teach a knowledge, skill, or attitude. Those things are true for both, and I believe the teaching behaviors that a teacher might use, those I think, for the most part, are universal. I think it's twofold. First, it is the opportunities, as I described. Those small moments that happen are much more likely to happen with a supervising resident than a supervising faculty member. It depends on the setting, but I think the moments are more likely to happen. And then I think there's a unique relationship that's less hierarchical and more open to inquiry and being wrong and exploring together that I think happens when someone, it's a near peer, if you will, near peer teaching that just creates, I think, more opportunity for more dialogue, feeling less evaluated. I think certainly we'd have a challenge with this where medical students, if I'm teaching a medical student, you know, how to interpret an arterial blood gas, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, he's grading me. And that's in their brain is thinking, Brad Sharpe, my attending, is going to give me a grade based on this. And I think there's less of that with the supervising resident. So again, I think that creates an opportunity where some of that gets stripped away. And so culturally, I think it creates opportunities. But I think many of the skills and certainly the content is, I guess the last comment, I'd say the content sometimes is different and valuable. So you know, as I get older, I'm further and further away from the nuts and bolts of the small things to take care of patients. You know, the exact dosing of magnesium to replete that's something I could probably figure out. It's in there somewhere. But the subtleties of that and how optimally to do it in this healthcare system, that's a resident that can teach a student to do that. Or how to be an intern. An intern can teach a student how to be an intern because that skill of managing a long to-do list, multiple pages at the same time, people all wanting me to do something, that's a skill in itself, that systems-based practice skill. An intern can say to a student, here's how I deal with the stress, or here's how I prioritize. So again, I think there probably are.
So maybe that practical aspect of day-to-day stuff, it's really that near peer that is perhaps the best teacher.
Oh, such value for that. When an intern says to me, I want to work on being more efficient, I will ask them at the beginning of our time together, what are your goals? And they say to me, I want to be more efficient. I say, listen, I am not the person to teach you efficiency. I can teach you efficiency from 15 years ago when I was an intern, but the system was different. I said, that really is the resident that teaches efficiency and really hopefully gives them a skill set. And again, our job, I think, is to give that senior resident this. They have it in there how to be efficient, but can we give them the skills to deliver that in a way, to teach that in a way that then that intern it sticks, and they will actually do something different.
Right. So I think that's an important point where when you've just worked on it yourself to try to learn it, then maybe it's easier from that standpoint to be able to explain how you went through it and learned it yourself versus us older, more experienced faculty who have long forgotten how we learned it from the...
Yeah, I think so. Again, opportunity for near peers. There's a skill set there. There's a knowledge, a skill, and attitudes that they can teach each other that we cannot. And I really believe that's foundational for a person's career as a physician or healthcare provider.
Right. So as a person who's really had a lot of expertise and knowledge about training others to teach, and you're working with residents, what are the types of things that you focus on with them that would be important? What are the things that you're specifically looking for and helping them with?
In terms of helping them to be more effective teachers. Yeah. I'm a firm believer that keeping it simple is important, and that my teaching philosophy in some ways, born out of the Stanford faculty development course, is very behaviorally driven. Very much driven by specific behaviors a teacher can do that are grounded in educational theory. So I start almost any session with residents with creating a positive learning climate, just making the place where people are excited to be there, where the students, they want to work with you. I use this analogy for the residents. I'll say to them, as a resident, you can probably look at your schedule for the next month, look at the attending you're going to be working with. Some attendings you see the name, you're very excited. Other attendings, you're not so excited about. Part of that is a learning climate. I'll be honest, I say to them, part of that is that some attendings create a learning climate that make you want to be there, and I try to give them the skills. And learning climate includes everything from, is it a stimulating environment? Are people excited to be there? Are they enthusiastic? Is it a physical space that's conducive to learning? Can the medical student see the surgical field at any point in the surgery, for instance? Do they know the student's name? Does anyone know the student's name or why they're there? Just those are some of the things I start with, are learning climate, because those I think are foundational. Learning climate is a pervasive aspect of clinical teaching. I'll say from the moment that a student walks up to the for rounds in the morning, the moment they walk up, there's a learning climate being set, and it exists the entire time. So I really start there as foundational and try to teach behaviors that are born out of educational theory. About the educational theory says these things may create an effective learning climate.
But I think there are a few folks who would think that, you know, residents, they don't really know enough. They don't really know what's, and it really, we shouldn't really be encouraging them to teach. It's really the faculty's job to do that. So you want to debate that any further than what the things we already brought up?
You know, I think that's a dangerous, again, relevant to our previous comments, I think it's a dangerous statement to make. And I think we know some of this. This is an area of the literature I'm not as familiar with, about the hidden curriculum that students sometimes hear and what happens when the attending goes home. But that's the majority of the time a learner spends in the hospital. Is not, again, in most programs. I think some programs, but I think the majority of their time that they're interfacing with is with a supervising senior resident or a supervising resident. So just on time alone, I think that's a dangerous assumption to make. And then I just think there are skills that I think I and you are probably more qualified to teach. Certainly, I think that's true. But that's not universal, and there are other things that we're not the most effective people to teach. So it's taking advantage of the opportunities and then delivering the content, again, knowledge, skills, and attitudes across the competencies. That to say that we should be responsible for all that, well, I think you'd flip it on its head and say that's not taking advantage of the resource you have. You take in a residency that's 6 years long, you take a PGY6, someone who's been there 6 years, they've accumulated a wealth of experience. Let's harness that. For that intern, let's take advantage of their experiences and teach them how to teach in a way that's time efficient and thoughtful and learner-centered.
I think a lot of people would recognize that when you teach, that you indeed get something out of that. That's why you learn so much.
Oh, of course.
Yourself.
Of course. Yeah. That again, that's the secondary gain of building teaching skills. Certainly, when people are asked or teach content, that we know this, that they know the content better than they did before they had to teach it. So that's certainly true. And then there's the magical moment, I hope people feel, when you teach someone and they actually then do something different. I think procedurally it's easiest to make this analogy of, you imagine a surgical intern with the surgical senior resident, they're in the case together, surgical resident says, tie knots this way, you'll find out it's much more efficient. 2 weeks later when they do another case, the intern just does that knot automatically. Like, that's a very powerful moment, hopefully, that they feel. And again, that's part of the positive feedback loop that hopefully happens in the clinical teaching environment.
Oh, that's great. Well, Brad, we're just really pleased and excited for you to be here with us and spend the time working with our residents and helping us with our educational programs here in Singapore. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Best of luck to you on this and other sort of ventures that you have. And thanks once again.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. Pleasure.